The West Indies Federation was a short-lived political union of British Caribbean colonies with the aim of gaining independence from the United Kingdom as one single state. The federation comprised 10 territories and existed from January 3, 1958 to May 31, 1962. The federation unfortunately collapsed due to internal political conflicts, which will be discussed in this video. Welcome to the Black British Hub, where I explore histories of the racialized peoples of Britain and the British Empire. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and keep notified. In 1956, the UK Parliament passed the British Caribbean Federation Act, which established the West Indies Federation in 1958. There were previous attempts to establish a federation, but all failed and never got far to creating one across the British Caribbean. The reason why the UK set up a Caribbean Federation could be due to various factors. World War II was a major decline to the British Empire as the war destroyed its financial independence. Respect for Britain decreased after Japan temporarily took over some of its colonies in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. Britain only recovered them following the atomic bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but the damage was done. On August 15, 1947, India gained independence from Britain, apart from the areas affected in the partitioning of India, later known to be Pakistan and Bangladesh. They were carved out of independence on the same day. Anyway, because of Britain's declining influence during the war and post-war, the process of decolonization began with its various colonies, where many entered a period of self-government. Labour rebellions had also emerged across the Caribbean in countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica and St. Vincent from the 1930s up until the 1950s and 60s. Around this period, trade unionism was rising and individuals of the Caribbean middle class had set up their own parties, associating them with popular mass movements. This pressure forced the British to soften their authority over Caribbean colonies. For example, in Jamaica 1944, a new constitution was granted, which permitted limited self-government, universal adult suffrage, and a two-party House of Representatives. 2 years later, universal adult suffrage was passed in Trinidad and Tobago, and a limited self-government was granted in 1956. We see that the British Caribbean colonies began a process of decolonization. There have been regional groupings and attempts at integration across the Caribbean before the formation of the West Indies Federation. There were two groupings created, the British Leeward Islands and the British Windward Islands. The former was created in the late 17th century and the latter was created in 1833. The Leeward Islands are situated in the northern parts of the Lesser Antilles, whilst the Windward Islands are situated in the southern parts. The rest of the islands colonized by Britain were separate colonies. These included Bahamas, Barbados, British Guiana, British Honduras and Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the Cayman Islands. Tobago was originally in the Windward Islands, but following the economic collapse of Tobago, Britain integrated Tobago with Trinidad, and thus the United Colony of Trinidad and Tobago was formed. This ended Tobago's grouping with the Windward Islands. The attempts at integration of the British Caribbean that failed began in 1876 when the Governor-in-Chief of the Windward Islands, Sir John Pope Hennessy, with primary authority over Barbados, tried to form a formal union between Barbados and other islands. The planter class and rich mulattoes were against this plan, but labourers supported this plan as they believed this would enable them to look for employment with higher wages or buy small plots of land elsewhere in the Caribbean. However, the proposal was dropped due to deadly riots. There was another proposal in 1897 of the same plan, but the Colonial Office rejected it because Barbados became a separate colony. Fast forward to the 1930s, when politics of the Caribbean people began to develop, there were further proposals of a Caribbean Federation. Whilst in the early 1930s, there were still other proposals led by the British. By 1938, a Caribbean group proposed the idea of a federation. The Caribbean Labour Congress wanted a federation that included the Eastern Caribbean, British Guiana, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Bahamas. In response, Britain appointed a commission, but in 1939 it concluded that the Caribbean were not ready to accept the principles of political and economic unity. This also brought an end to any more initiatives at forming a federation, and during World War II, any attempt was temporarily abandoned. In 1945, Britain came back to the idea of forming a federation with the intentions of full self-government as the final goal. This attracted Caribbean middle-class figures and trade unions. In Montego Bay, Jamaica, 2 years later, a conference between Caribbean leaders and colonial officials were held, where they discussed the idea of a West Indian Federation. It took 9 years to pass the British Caribbean Federation Act 1956, which was the basis of the formulation of the West Indies Federation in 1958. The West Indies Federation was made up of 10 provinces. The following were Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Jamaica, along with the Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos Islands, Montserrat, St. Christopher, Nevis, Anguilla, which is modern-day St. Kitts and Nevis, and also Anguilla, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. The biggest province was Jamaica, and the second was Trinidad and Tobago, which meant they made the biggest financial contributions. British Guiana and British Honduras, now Belize, had observer status. The Federation's population was around 3 to 4 million people. Most were of West African descent, with the minority being East Indian, Chinese, European, and Caribs. The majority were Protestant, with Catholic, Hindu, and Muslims being the minorities. Britain classified the Federation as being part of its Caribbean and North Atlantic territories region, which was shared alongside other islands, including Bermuda. The Federation was self-governing, although it was pro-Commonwealth, and the head of state was Queen Elizabeth II. Each province was a British colony. The Governor-General was Lord Hailey's of Britain, and the Prime Minister was Sir Grantley Adams, the Premier of Barbados. The federal capital was in Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister was elected by the House of Representatives, and a cabinet was chosen by the Prime Minister. Initially, the Council of State was led by the Governor-General, which included the Prime Minister, Cabinet, 3 senators, and 3 civil servants. However, in 1960, Britain agreed to abolish the Council, and the Cabinet took over the powers of the Council. A number of issues were debated throughout its existence with a goal of strengthening the Federation. Among these were direct taxation by the federal government, central planning for development, establishment of a regional customs union, and reform of the federal constitution. The issue of direct taxation was particularly controversial. The Federation was not permitted to levy income tax for at least the first 5 years of its life. Added to this were the greatly differing positions among the territories with respect to how other federal taxes should be levied. Cooperation in higher education was expanded. The University College of the West Indies, located in Mona, Jamaica in 1948, established its second campus at St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. However, there were multiple disagreements between different territories which ultimately led to the demise of the Federation. Issues included ethnic tensions between Afro-Caribbean people and East Indians, who make a large percentage of Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, disagreements over the federal structure. Freedom of movement within the Federation was restricted as the larger provinces feared mass migration from the smaller ones. Potential financial strains on bigger islands like Jamaica on smaller islands. Ideological differences between parties. The Prime Minister's position was weak as he could not dissolve Parliament. Let's go over these points in more detail. Political scientist Adam Getachew wrote that the relation between the Asian Indian ethnic group, or East Indians, who make up a large share of Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, and the majority Afro-West Indian group were a source of tensions in the West Indies Federation. Guyana rejected having membership of the Federation because its government believed it lacked sufficient protection for ethnic minorities. At the same time, Guyana was also focused on their fight to independence as a nation. The federal structure of the Federation was weak, as its provinces didn't operate under a single customs union. This meant that each province acted as a separate economy, complete with tariffs. Complete freedom of movement within the federation was prohibited because the larger provinces were afraid of mass migration from smaller provinces into theirs. Additionally, Jamaica opposed the idea of a single customs union. The federal budget was also reliant on grants from the British. However, Eric Williams, the Premier of Trinidad and Tobago, who became the first Prime Minister from independence, supported a strong federal state. A strong federal state would mean it would be capable of undertaking economic projects and redistribution, as well as giving each province autonomy. However, critics in Jamaica were against any redistribution that would lead Jamaica to provide grants to smaller islands. Additionally, the provincial budgets of both countries were bigger than the federal budget. This led to repeated requests for both countries to provide greater financing to the federal budget. However, both countries did not take this well, as they were already contributing 85% of the federal budget, leaving potential financial strains. There were two federation-wide political parties: the West Indies Federal Labour Party, who were Democratic Socialists, and the Democratic Labour Party, who were conservative. They were both confederations of local political parties. The West Indies Federal Labour Party consisted of urban-based parties, and the Democratic Labour Party consisted of rural-based parties. The WIFLP advocated for a central bank and a democratic socialist society with full internal self-government for all provinces, while the DLP regularly attacked socialism, avoided talking about internal self-government, advocated for low taxes, while stressing about West Indian unity, freedom of worship and speech, and encouraging trade unionism, as they supported labourism despite being anti-socialist and anti-communist. Therefore, the ideological juxtaposition contributed to the problems of the federation. The position of the Prime Minister was weak because he could not dissolve Parliament. The dissolution of Parliament usually happens after the Prime Minister announces there will be a general election. Without these powers, it might have meant that the Prime Minister could just be replaced without question. Jamaica was disappointed that independence had still not yet been granted to the Federation, and in 1961 the majority of voters in the national referendum voted to withdraw from the Federation. Britain granted independence to Jamaica in 1962. This put the Federation in jeopardy, and attempts to save it were useless. Trinidad and Tobago shortly left the Federation afterwards. Without its two largest provinces, the West Indies Federation was abolished in May 31, 1962. Trinidad and Tobago became independent in August 1962. However, some of the provinces of the Federation today still remain under British occupation, such as Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos, which were part of the Jamaican province, Montserrat and Anguilla. Today, there is a loose confederated organization called the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM for short. It is an intergovernmental organization that acts on behalf of all Caribbean interests. Unlike the West Indies Federation, CARICOM includes all Caribbean countries and oversees territories and departments. However, the organization has been subject to criticism due to its weakness in preserving free movement of labor, for example, or strengthening Caribbean sovereignty, as CARICOM normalizes neocolonialism throughout the Caribbean. This is not unique to other intergovernmental organizations, such as the African Union and the Arab League, where they have taken stances that damage the sovereignty of their states, especially the poorer ones. When a country does take action against neocolonialism, they find themselves isolated from these intergovernmental organizations. It would take a lot of unlearning for any potential Caribbean unity to happen in the future. All Caribbean nations, however unique to each other, have a common history. Will there be a federation or confederation like this again, but this time constructed by the Caribbean people? Let me know what you think. In the meantime, thank you for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it.